Is America a Christian nation today? Well, we can talk about demographics. Is it predominantly Christian? Is it majority Christian? And we can also look at the trends to see what that has to tell us. Unfortunately, we don't have to reinvent the wheel on that. We can, in fact, use the skills we have and the data we have from sociologists. This is based on survey data from the Pew Forum, which studies religion in American life. And here they've conceptualized America as if it was 100 people. What would it turn out to be in terms of religious denomination or identity? If America was 100 people, there would be 62 of them who would be Christians of some variety. And you can see the breakdown here. 40 of those would be Protestant, 19 of those would be Catholic, 2 would be Mormon, and 2 would be some other variety of Christian. But still, 62 out of 100, or 62% of the American population is Christian. 2% is Jewish, 1% is Muslim, 2% are other religions. Hindu and Buddhist are each about 1%. And religiously unaffiliated is 29%. It's actually bigger than any one of those breakdowns within Christianity. But as a whole, if you lumped it all together as Christianity broadly considered, it would still be a majority Christian nation. However, if you went back even a few years, those numbers were very different. So, as we'll see, even in the last 20 years or so, 18 years, there's been a substantial decline of the proportion of Americans that call themselves Christian, that identify themselves in that label. So in 2007, 78% of America was self-labeled Christian. Now it's 62%. That's a very substantial decline, and the religiously unaffiliated number has gone up. The other religions is up a little bit. From 5% to 7%, it's not a revolution. But the religiously unaffiliated going up are the so-called nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, the nuns, are going up, and those identified as Christian has gone down. And it's been even more steep if you look back historically. In 1972, and throughout the 1970s, 90% of Americans defined themselves as some variety of Christian. So if you went back to the year I was born, 1975, 90% were Christian. Now, when you got to the 1980s, that went down a bit, so that by the 1990s, you see it's down at 80%. And it lives around 80% through the 90s into the early 2000s. But from 2002, let's say, when it's still around 80%, it's now dropped precipitously in the last 25 years to this low 60s. If you were a Christian who's lived through this transformation, that's a big change. From being 90%, almost everybody, to being 60%, where you're maybe 2/3, even less than 2/3 of the American population. That's going to change things. Now, that's the question of, is America a Christian nation demographically? Was it historically? Obviously, the majority was Christian. But was America founded as a Christian nation, as a self-defined nation for the benefit, the ideology of that large majority? Well, there are plenty of people out there who point to documents like the Constitution or the Founding Fathers, many of whom identified as deists who didn't really believe in conventional organized religion, and they say, obviously, it's a no-brainer. America was never a Christian nation. Let's look at, for example, in the U.S. Constitution, in Article 6, Clause 3, when describing certain officers of the government and elected officials, it says that they should be bound by oath or affirmation to support the Constitution, but in the last clause, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So federal offices, there has never been, since the Constitution, a religious test for office. And if it were a Christian nation to be run by Christians, you would think there would be some kind of test for office. In fact, in England at the time, there was a test for office. You had to swear an oath on a Protestant Bible. So Jews were not eligible to become members of parliament because they wouldn't swear on that Bible, and neither were Catholics because it was a Protestant Bible, not a Catholic Bible. So there was a religious test for office even in England when they were talking about rights of Englishmen. America was progressive in that respect. It was ahead of the curve in not including a religious test for office. So this would seem to prove you can't call it a Christian nation. Or you look at the First Amendment, which was adopted around the same time as the Constitution itself. Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So you mean someone who's Muslim or someone who's Jewish can live their religious life however they choose? And the government's not going to establish a particular religion as the formal, documented, official version of religion that everyone has to support, like a Church of England? Wow, that seems very anti-establishment of religion, at least. Now, it should be worth pointing out that it wasn't obvious for the first almost 200 years of the Republic that these clauses from the federal Constitution would apply to state government. So it could be the case that you could have a religious test for office in a state government and not necessarily in federal office. And it was not until the 1950s and 60s that the Supreme Court began to apply these rights and these limits to state governments as well. Or you look at the Founding Fathers and things that they wrote and believed. So here in the Treaty of Tripoli, which was negotiated under John Adams and was ratified by the Senate, which included many Founding Fathers still serving, it says in Article 11 of this treaty with the Barbary pirates in the north coast of Africa, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, Musliman was the phrase they used then, and as the said states never entered into any war or active hostility against any Muslim nation, it was declared by the parties no pretext arising from religious opinion shall ever produce an interruption of harmony between the two countries. The key point is that first clause is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. Can you get more clear than that? Well, let me try one more. This is a famous letter from Thomas Jefferson when he was president in 1802. Wrote a letter to a group of Baptists in Connecticut who were concerned about religion and state intertwining. And Jefferson wrote, believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between a man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that the act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting, he's quoting the First Amendment, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. So separation of church and state is not explicitly in the Constitution, but it's what Jefferson says that clause meant. It's a wall of separation between church and state. So there's always been a separation of church and state from the time of Jefferson, who was there at the Declaration of Independence. Christian nationalists are just making up history to take us backwards to when they were 90% and they were in charge and the women stayed home and the gays were afraid. It's all made up. Or maybe history is a little more complicated. So I'm going to share with you 3 brief texts from this founding period and a little after, that 2 of them were actually passed and adopted as founding documents in America, and 1 was proposed but was not adopted. So we'll see if you can figure out which is which. So this one begins, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among those life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And near the end, with the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Was that formally adopted? Yes. Hopefully, I gave it away with declaration in the last line. Clearly adopted in 1774. I'll also note, by the way, that the Constitution, which doesn't mention God in the main text, does mention religion near the end, because the date of the Constitution is listed as Year of Our Lord. Now, was that just a convention? Did that just assume Christianity as the context? Well, that's where people are debating. Now, here's another one. This dates from 1779. As the happiness of a people and the good order and preservation of civil government essentially depend upon piety, religion, and morality, and as those cannot be generally diffused through a community but by the institution of the public worship of God and of public instructions in piety, religion, and morality, therefore, to promote their happiness, to secure the good order and preservation of their government, the people of this Commonwealth have a right to invest their legislature with power to authorize and require, and the legislature shall from time to time authorize and require, the several towns, parishes, precincts, and other bodies politic or religious societies to make suitable provision at their own expense for the institution of the public worship of God, and for the support and maintenance of public Protestant teachers of piety, religion, and morality, in all such cases where such provision shall not be made voluntarily. Was this actually adopted? Maybe shocking, but it was. This is part of the Constitution of the state of Massachusetts. John Adams, one of the founding fathers, second president, was one of the major drafters of the language of this Constitution. Remember, this is the state establishing religion, and they're tolerant because any Protestant is fine. They're not choosing one Protestant, but any Protestant is welcome. In other states, it was Catholicism. In other states, it was Anglicanism. That was the established church. It took a while for that to fade away in a number of states. So here's a third one, and by process of elimination, you'll guess this was not actually adopted, but let's see if you can recognize where this comes from. We, the people of the United States, humbly acknowledging Almighty God as the source of all authority and power in civil government, the Lord Jesus Christ as the ruler among nations, his revealed will as the supreme law of the land, in order to constitute a Christian government, and in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the inalienable rights and blessings of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to ourselves, our posterity, and all the people, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Well, something sounds off, right? Well, here I've underlined what has been added. This was a proposed amended preamble for the U.S. Constitution, where they're clearly adding in explicitly Christian language to the U.S. Constitution, which does not have it on purpose. This language was proposed in 1864 during the U.S. Civil War. The feeling was by some ministers that the war was going so badly for the Union because they hadn't acknowledged God in their founding documents. And perhaps they could win and get God on their side if they acknowledged the Christian God in their documents. Now, there were similar proposals for this kind of language to change the beginning of the Constitution considered in Congress in 1874, 1895, 1896, 1910, 1947, 1949, 1951, 1953, 1955, 1956, 1957, 1959, 1961, 1963, and 1967, and 1969. They never passed. Yet. Do you think it would pass today? Probably not the states. But one house of Congress? Maybe. You see, there's always been in American life at least a soft Christian nationalism, or Christian supremacy, you might call it, or Christian establishment. There's been Christmas music and Christmas decorations. You see them, they're out. They've been out for weeks. There's people wishing you Merry Christmas. There's what work holidays are included automatically in the schedule. There's the decorations on city hall lawns. There are those public school holiday concerts and what songs they choose to sing. I mean, there's a context of a majority Christian culture out there. And that's a kind of soft Christian nationalism. You can't argue that the American population was historically overwhelmingly Christian demographically and even predominantly Protestant. In 1970, it was 90% Christian and 65% Protestant. So that's almost 2/3 of Americans were not just Christian, but were Protestants. And there's definitely some Christian privilege involved in that. These cultural elements that I mentioned, but also some government entanglements. Before the Supreme Court began changing things in the 1940s and 50s, there were required Bible readings in public schools. There were required prayers in public schools, sometimes prayers written by the State Board of Regents that defined education in the state. There was mandatory release time to religious officials who came into schools to teach kids. And these are public schools in Illinois, in New York, in Pennsylvania, not in the Deep South. What changed was when the Supreme Court decided that establishment clause applied to the states too. One of the ironies was, in modern times, as the Christian right has tried to use government funding to support religious schools that teach their ideology, there's a whole series of laws in many state constitutions that prohibit the use of public funds for parochial religious schools. They were passed in the 1870s. They're called Blaine Amendments, after someone who proposed something like this in the federal Constitution. The reason why they're in so many state constitutions is because they wanted to avoid giving money to Catholic schools. And why were there separate Catholic schools? Because the Catholics said, when we're doing Bible readings, can we use a Catholic Bible once in a while instead of the Protestant Bible? And the people in charge of the school district, who were all Protestant, said, no, we own these schools and they're going to be Protestant, the public schools. So then the Catholics started parochial schools, and then the Protestant establishment wanted to prove they could never give any money to those private religious schools because we own the public schools. But now that they don't own the public schools anymore, after these Supreme Court decisions, the shoe's on the other foot. And now many of those provisions are trying to get out of the constitutions. Today, America is much less demographically Christian. And of course, not all Christians want to impose Christianity through the government. You may have heard of an organization called the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty. One of their leaders wrote a book last year called How to End Christian Nationalism. This is a Baptist, that same Baptist tradition that Jefferson wrote to in 1802. And she spoke just this past week to a program run by Jews for a Secular Democracy, which is an offshoot of our National Society for Humanistic Judaism. It's appropriate for Jews to think about this question, of course, because Christian nationalism is going to affect the Jews. Even that soft Christian nationalism affected the Jews from time to time. There's a wonderful short story by an author named Grace Paley. It's called The Loudest Voice. And it's about a school in the 1950s that's putting on a Christmas pageant. But it's one of those schools which is 85% Jewish. And so all of the stars of the show, of the Christmas pageant, which is the Jesus story, are Jewish. And there's a comment at one point near the end where they say, these three people are playing the wise men and they don't have speaking parts. And it's too bad because it's actually their religion that we're telling the story. The only Christian kids don't have speaking parts, but their voices aren't loud enough, so they don't get to talk. But that's the world of, the soft Christian power. Or there were those anecdotes where a choir would be singing at the school, and whenever the word Jesus showed up or Christ showed up in the song, the volume went down because all the Jews wouldn't say that word as they were singing. Well, that's that soft Christian experience. That affected Jews to some extent. But the hard Christian nationalism is really going to affect Jews. In fact, the cover story of the current issue of Moment magazine is called "The Dangerous Anti-Semitism Lurking in the Christian Nationalist Movement and in the American Government." I do want to give them credit because I'm going to borrow a couple quotations they cited in that article. Some Christians definitely do want to impose their Christianity on society, and they are not going to stop at saying Merry Christmas or a few songs at a Christmas pageant. Christian nationalists today are fusing a strong conservative ideology with a firm belief that America was founded as a Christian nation, is a Christian nation today, and should be a Christian nation in the future, from local government to state government to the national government. And to be a real American, one must be Christian, period. Usually the right kind of Christian. They claim to fight anti-Christian bias in statute and legal decisions and in government policy. But what they're really doing is empowering Christians to impose their Christianity in subtle and in blatant ways. For example, you hear an initiative to restore religious freedom. What does that allow you to do now? You're allowed to proselytize in a work setting. So your boss can say, I want to share my testimony of my faith with you, and you have to listen to it. They've added prayer back into public schools, or tried to. Even religious instruction in public schools in release time or in active settings. Teaching the Bible in the school, putting the Ten Commandments in the school, and on and on. One of these Christian nationalists, a pastor named Douglas Wilson, wrote this when he was disappointed that a particular pronouncement by President Trump didn't go far enough. He wrote, "The president could issue a proclamation that acknowledged that Jesus rose from the dead, and Congress could authorize the funds to have that proclamation printed and bound, read in all the schools, and posted in all the federal courthouses." Could you imagine a world where Jesus rose from the dead is on the courthouse as you walk in? There are over 100 congregations that are part of this movement that Wilson is trying to organize. Over 500 private schools that are trying to teach by his tenets. One of the followers of one of those schools who sends his kids there, moved to Tennessee to be able to send his kids to that kind of a school, is the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. Now, this is a bit different from the moral majority of the 1980s. Then they felt confident. They were the establishment. In 1980, 60% of the country was Protestant, and then another 25% was Catholic, and they had conservative morals, and the moral majority felt like they were putting out the will of the people. That's why they called themselves the moral majority. But now, Christian nationalists feel besieged. They feel like they're fighting combatively against this secular establishment, the elites who are leading the country astray. There's shades of Christian dominionism in there too, which is a belief that Christians should be in charge. They have the right ideology, and they should be the ones making all the decision. They should run society by biblical rules and values. And as for non-Christians, well, here's a chilling line from The Case for Christian Nationalism by Stephen Wolfe. He writes, "Non-Christians living among us are entitled to justice, peace, and safety, but they are not entitled to political equality. Public space should be exclusively Christian." These are the good old days of Emperor Constantine establishing the Roman Empire as a Christian empire. These are even the good old days of Pilgrim-run Boston, who didn't want any Anglicans in Boston. If you do the Freedom Trail walk, which is a number of wonderful sites through Boston, one of the sites is called the Governor's Cemetery, which was built outside of the city limits of Boston because the Puritans didn't want any damn Anglicans burying themselves in the city. This is the city on a hill. This is American freedom. Well, it's also the power of religion and the power of running a government by your own beliefs. When you mix religion and governing, you see, even in theory, politics becomes not just a choice of the correct or mistaken policy. It's righteousness. It's sin. The Christian nationalist podcasters and writers and ministers out there declare that there should be no tolerance for sin. What's sin for them? It's LGBTQ identity. It's divorce. It's abortion. It's not just a bad choice or a bad policy. It's a sin that you have to stop. Christians should hate what is evil, and evil is anything that's in the other political direction. And Christians should use government power to promote the true religion, because it's cruel to let people go to hell. I'm doing them a favor by making them Christian. And they believe that anybody opposing them is either ignorant or lost, that's being charitable, or they're a willful heretic. Like the MAGA movement and its godfather, Donald Trump, there is an edge of belligerence and combativeness to this message, that it's a war out there. And other similarities with the MAGA movement include belief in America first, because it was chosen by God to be the home of this wonderful setting for Christian dominion. There's a commitment to fighting the corrupt and weak elites with a strong, muscular policy. There's an unsubtle patriarchy and a gender hierarchy that they want to impose. And there's a belief that the world is out to get you, which means that Christian nationalists, like the MAGA movement, are susceptible to conspiracy theories and also to finding corruption everywhere because, of course, Satan is always busy. When you start condemning economic and cultural elites, and you believe in secret conspiracies to corrupt your morals, when you hate globalists without any true loyalty to the one true light country, well, the jump to anti-Semitism from there is not that far. And as usual with anti-Semitism, it comes in many varieties. Some Christian nationalists have turned back to Christian theological tropes of Jews rejecting Jesus and thus being rejected by God. You can read this today, not 100 years ago. They blame the Jews for conniving too much American support for Israel. It's that old dual loyalty accusation. They blame Jews for tending to vote Democratic, aka evil. So if you are voting for evil, you yourself maybe are evil. They support immigration, especially non-Christian or non-white immigration, and white nationalism and Christian nationalism has a lot of overlap. And of course, Jews endorse LGBTQ rights. But what does that mean from a Christian nationalist perspective? You're corrupting. You are betraying. You're replacing true Christian Americans. Jews are blamed for being behind the pornography industry and behind financial corruption. That last name Epstein is coming home to roost in that circle. And now there's even been a turn to Holocaust denial. You may have heard about Tucker Carlson interviewing a Holocaust denier named Darryl Cooper and the self-proclaimed anti-Semite Nick Fuentes. Now, some Christian nationalists have attempted to push back on their own movement's anti-Semitism. You can look up something called the Antioch Declaration, which was a statement of principles put out by Christian nationalists who nevertheless were opposed to anti-Semitism. It affirms that the Holocaust really happened, as if one has to do that, but they do. It denies the compatibility of Nazism and racial anti-Semitism with true Christianity. Again, they had to do that. That means that people out there are saying that. They deny any kind of global Jewish conspiracy or inherent evil in all Jews. However, the document still affirms the true tenets of Christianity as they define them, and it expects that at the end of days, the Jews will convert. At least the good Jews will. So with that kind of love, okay. Now, Jewish liberals have been raising the alarms and fighting the legal battles for many years. But some Jewish conservatives, until recently, thought they could ride that beast of Christian nationalism towards a shared goal. After all, they want government support for Jewish religious day schools. And if you have government support for religious schools, then maybe they would be eligible too. They share an opposition to LGBTQ rights, particularly Orthodox Jews. They have a robust support for Israel, and they hope that the historically robust evangelical support for Israel could be built on. And if nothing else, they have a shared enemy in Islam. And the enemy of my enemy could be my friend. And for many conservative or traditionalist Jews, a soft patriarchy is okay. There may even be parallels that they find between Jewish religious nationalism in Israel, aka religious Zionism, or the worst of the settler movement in the West Bank, with the kind of Christian nationalism that they're enacting here. They see Israel as a model for that kind of religious nationalism, although many Israelis would prefer a secular Israel instead of a religious one. One Jewish defender of Christian nationalism wrote this. I couldn't believe this. I have to share this with you. The Judeo-Christian tradition, he writes, is the only affirmative positive force capable of withstanding and rolling back the three hegemonic forces that today threaten ruin for the West: wokeism, Islamism, and global neoliberalism. So that gives the Jewish supporter of fighting those things an ally in Christian nationalism. And he writes even more. The more biblically oriented and the more authentically Christian America is, the better off both America and American Jews will be. So the more Christian America is, the better off Jews will be, the claim was. Jewish conservatives assumed that anti-Semitism was only a left-wing problem. It was the anti-Israel people, it was the Palestinian supporters, it was the globalists who hate any kind of nation. Those are the people we have to worry about. But now, one of those Jewish conservatives calls right-wing anti-Semitism a five-alarm fire. You might have heard about that chat among young Republicans in these many chapters that were appalling. You have certain nominees who have admitted in text, I have a little Nazi streak in me, as if they're joking about it. Even Vice President J.D. Vance recently at a conference said he hopes his wife converts from Hinduism to the true religion of Christianity. So the problem of Christian nationalism is here. Question for us is, what can we do about it? Well, like any loss of privilege, the loss of Christian privilege for Christian America is difficult to accept. We've had these conversations about white privilege over the last 10 years. We can be honest about American history. We can understand what happened in the past, what really happened in the past, but also what's changed today. And instead of saying, well, the founding fathers never wanted religion and states to be entangled, when they did, some of them, we can be honest about the positive arguments today for doing it differently. The positive benefits of inclusion and tolerance, and not just claiming that the past would have agreed with us. Thomas Jefferson would have agreed with us. John Adams would have, well, we know that John Adams would not have agreed with us. Yes, we can challenge bad facts, and people like David Barton and wall builders of these organizations putting out terrible American history that's just flat wrong. They want to change the textbooks. They want to change how we teach it. We can fight that. But we can also celebrate the evolution of America. We believe in evolution. So why not use that idea to reinforce the fact that this change is good? We have new values that are important. The secularization and separation of religion and government in new and better ways. The values of diversity, the importance of immigration to making America what it is, even families that mix religions in their family, and that's okay. They can be happy too. A second approach, Amanda Tyler of the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty, who did that program earlier this week, says that Christian nationalism grew over many centuries. And it will take time to go a different direction, to dismantle it, both in the extreme case and in the ordinary benefits of historical Christian predominance. The Constitution gives us a minimum scaffolding we can build on. But the social assumptions that were there already will take some time to work through. When they first put chaplains in the American Army, they were only Protestant. During the Civil War, they thought they were being magnanimous by allowing Catholic chaplains for the first time. And it took Jewish lobbying direct to President Lincoln to finally get the first rabbi as a chaplain in the U.S. Army. It took arguing. It took debate. It took pushing. It took time. Now, it has helped that a number of Christians are speaking out against Christian nationalism. There's even an organization called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. It's enabled religious minorities to speak out too, because sometimes, when you're the 2% or the 1%, that one person in the village of 100, do you really want to make a lot of noise? Do you really want to draw attention to yourself or make yourself a target in your town or in your school? Well, having other people speak out about it is valuable. Having coalitions, even having clergy that wear collars show up and talk about why you don't want to do this religious practice in a school. I found out just a few months ago, I saw some Unitarian ministers protesting around immigration issues wearing collars. And so I asked one of them, I said, I didn't know Unitarian ministers wore collars. And he said, well, we generally don't unless we're doing public protesting. Because you want to be visible as clergy. It makes a difference. So if we have those allies, use those allies to help us in those public debates. One other strategy we can follow is to challenge this idea of Judeo-Christian. You heard that before? Calling it Judeo-Christian really kind of cheapens both traditions. It makes them sort of thin and watery. And it still winds up being exclusive because the Judeo is kind of a window dressing. After all, remember, Christianity has the Hebrew Bible, except they call it the Old Testament. And they call it the Old Testament because it's old, because it was superseded by the New an improved testament. So don't fall for the trap of Judeo-Christian as including Jews. It really, really isn't. There's a wonderful resource that the Jews for a Secular Democracy organization has put together on their website, which is jfasd.org. They have a whole page on this question of Judeo-Christian and why the term is not useful. I want to give you just one example of this. This is from an organization called the National Day of Prayer Task Force, which sounds official, but actually is not. It's a private organization. But this organization, there we go. On their About Us page, you even see the American flag there, right? They describe what the American Day of Prayer, the National Day of Prayer Task Force is all about. It's an annual observance held on the first Thursday of May, inviting people to pray for the nation, created in 1952 by a resolution of Congress, signed into law by Harry Truman. The task force is a private organization. Its purpose is to encourage participation. It exists to communicate with every individual the need for personal repentance and prayer, to create appropriate materials, and to mobilize the Christian community to intercede for Americans' leaders and its families. The task force represents a Judeo-Christian expression of the national observance, based on the understanding this country was birthed in prayer and in reverence for the God of the Bible. That's that Christian America founding story. But you'll notice, even in this About Us, they have mobilizing Christian America and yet claiming Judeo-Christian. It gets even worse if you look at their statement of faith. Get ready. The Holy Bible is the inspired, only infallible, authoritative word of the living God. Well, which Bible? Already you've got a debate. There's only one God existing in three persons, Father, Son, Holy. Okay. So much for Judeo-Christian, right? This is Christian. The deity of our Lord Jesus Christ, his virgin birth, his sinless life, his miracle. I mean, this is a Christian doctrine. This is a Christian organization. And if you ever try to list your event on the National Day of Prayer website, where they list all the events, they want you to affirm that you are a Christian organization. And I remember when I was working in Michigan, this is 25 years ago, that a liberal group wanted to put together an interfaith prayer event and do it on the first Thursday of May and have it listed by the National Day of Prayer Task Force. And they were told no, because it's about Christianity. So if anyone tries to sell you on Judeo-Christian, don't buy. Push back. You have credibility, after all. You are Judeo, and you can use that to make your point. And the last suggestion is that you want to start local. Start with school boards. Start with people you know. After all, school boards are some of the front lines in these issues, whether it's banning books or how history is taught, or whether the Ten Commandments appear on the wall. I've sometimes suggested that I'd be okay with the Ten Commandments if they put it in the original Hebrew. Then I wouldn't have a problem with it. It's historical, but it doesn't seem to be what the goal is. School funding, of course, is a major issue, and now there's even an attempt in a few states to put religious chaplains in place in schools. And are they going to be the balanced, neutral chaplains you find at a hospital, or are they going to be the evangelizing chaplains you find in the Air Force and other settings? And the same is true for city councils, public space use, and so on. There are things we can do locally that can make a big difference in starting the momentum, pushing back. At the end of, in the middle actually of the Moment magazine article, there was a marvelous quote by Alan Solow, who was the former head of the Conference of the Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations. And I want to end with what he has to say. The best bulwark against anti-Semitism has been having a free and open society that follows democratic and small L liberal policies. That's how minorities get protected. Whether we like to admit it or not, the Jewish people are still a small people. We may have been very successful in America, but it's because we lived in a free and open society that respects the separation of church and state, the rule of law, and the equality of human beings regardless of their religious observance. That's the society that we need to work for and, yes, fight for against Christian nationalism. Thank goodness we are not alone.